I'm going to make a few announcements just because I want to keep you up and build you up, since sometimes the analytic stuff I present, how do I put this nicely, is not uplifting. It's a little down pressing. So since I saw you last, if I've got this right, I left New York and made a trip to California. And turns out it was the right 2 weeks to be away. I went to Los Angeles, where it was about 80 degrees every day and sunny. And then I went to San Francisco, was about 60, 65 degrees pretty much every day and sunny. So it was a very nice experience reading about what you were going through in my short sleeve shirt outside. So, but here's what I really wanted to tell you. I'm doing more and more of this kind of speaking, and this was by far the most successful trip we've made. That's why I want to share with you what it was. So very quickly, the first night I spoke at a place called Occidental College, some of you know, in Los Angeles. And there my talk was sponsored by the college, which had invited me, together with and some of you will get the historic ironies here, was co-sponsored by the ACLU of Southern California. And so that room was filled. That was a very nice way for me to start. That was the same day that I flew. That evening I gave the talk. I would guess about 200 people or so filling this room. The next night I gave a talk, a benefit for KPFK, which is the Pacifica Public Radio station for the Los Angeles area. This was in the Musicians Union Hall on Vine Street. It holds about 650 to 700 seats, and there were no empty seats in that hall. And I gave a talk not so different from what I try to do here every month, a little broader, a bit more history, but it was very heartening to do this. The third night was the most interesting. They drove me, the folks that were hosting me, which were mostly the people associated with KPFK, they drove me to a city I had never been to before called Santa Ana. It's about 30 miles south, heading towards San Diego from Los Angeles. And the whole trip, these hosts of mine were consoling me. They were explaining to me, we are crossing into Orange County. And they said that with a tone of voice that sounded like we were going into a scary place, and they referred to crossing the Orange Curtain. At a certain point in the highway, I guess we crossed into to Orange County from whatever the other county's called, LA County or something. And they said, look, we'll have 40 or 50 people, and there'll be good people, and there'll be important people to talk to, but you're not going to get the kind of audience. Well, I'll save you a lot of time. 450 people in this auditorium. I would guess at least a third to a half Mexican-American or Hispanic or however you're supposed to talk about them. Before I went on, they had a speaker, Ellen Brown. Some of you know her. She talks about public banking, and she was the speaker before me. And then there was a band playing Mexican music. And it was a very kind of a wonderful thing. It got everybody sort of jumping up and down, and then they ushered me up there, and I got the benefit of riding on the good feeling and the energy of the music. Most of the time, the people were not looking at me, they were looking at each other, and I asked, what is going on? And they said they'd never seen that many people who would come to a place like this to hear a person like me, and it was all a wonderment for them because they discovered they were a lot less alone in Orange County than they had thought they were, which means that my coming there had a much greater benefit than anything I had to say, because that's a very important understanding for people to have as a step towards activity. I then went to Northern California, short airplane ride, and the first night there I gave a talk at something calling itself the Revolutionary University of Oakland, California. And there on Telegraph Avenue, right where it crosses, for those of you who know, from Berkeley into Oakland, is a library, a little bit of a history like the Brecht Forum. And there they had this university, and I taught my economics class to the gathered students there. The next night I gave a benefit for KPFA, which is the same Pacifica radio system, but it's their station for the Bay Area, for San Francisco, Berkeley, and all of that. And that took place in the First Congregational Church of Berkeley, which is picked because it's the largest auditorium in Berkeley, holds about 700 people, and all the ground floor was completely full, and the balcony, except for one corner, was likewise full. So that was an amazing thing for me to see. And then 3 days later, I went to Sonoma, not for the reason you ought to go to Sonoma, which I hope you all know, but to speak at the Sonoma Community Center, where about 150 people, sober, I might mention, gathered, and I spoke to them. So in 6 speeches scattered over 12 days, I addressed 2,000 people. It was a total number that were involved. And the spirit and the enthusiasm was enough to carry me another 6 months of just sheer wow. So please be aware, things are changing in this country in a way that now literally my daily life encounters on a growing scale. So it was a remarkable trip, and I just wanted to let you know so that I'm not the only one who enjoys what this all represents. Okay. And for those of you that are interested, the audiences were older people, middle-aged. The only interesting thing was that if you're guessing, the age from 30 to 50 was scarce. People were either over 50 or under 30. That was the bulk of the people. All colors, all ethnicity, all that. But that middle age group, something awful happened to those people. I don't know what it is.
They were all at work.
Yes, possible. Yes, something is very interesting. Anyway, okay. So let's go through some short things, and then we'll get to the major topics for tonight. Well, one thing to talk about briefly happened today, so it's hot off the press. The euro took a major dive. It has been diving for quite a while, but it ended today pretty close to what we call parity, €1, $1. As little as 6 months ago, it took $1.40 to get a euro. That means a drop in the value of the euro relative to the dollar of a good third. That's a sign that the European economy is in very serious trouble. And it's a sign that those folks who deal in the euro are trying to get out of it, selling it around the world in order to acquire other currencies like the dollar, but not only the dollar. And it's something that's going to change many things in the world. Some of them are perhaps enjoyable for some of you. If you were thinking of traveling to Europe this coming summer, you will find it one hell of a lot cheaper than it was last summer, like a third cheaper. The restaurant, the hotel, the traveling, those costs are going to come down because the dollar is much more valuable relative to the euro because it's declined. But there are other changes that are going to happen. The United States economy, whose recovery, as I've tried to tell you many times, is 90% mirage or 90% ineffective in most people's lives. It's good for the top 10%, but they're the ones who didn't need it anyway, so it's a bizarre economic performance. That's going to become worse, our economy. Why? Because one of the few things that could keep this limp recovery going was the export sector, the ability of the United States to provide jobs for people producing stuff which Americans can no longer afford to buy, but which foreigners might buy. Particularly a world that has tended over the years to fetishize American goods. You know, that American goods are somehow sexier, or it's, you know, a French person who grows up understanding food then performs a mystery, enters a McDonald's. And all French people are confronted with a fundamental question: Why in the world would anyone do that? Especially if he or she is French and actually understands what food can be. Why do that? The answer is there's a whole mystique associated with sitting in a plastic chair at a plastic counter, unwrapping the plastic wrapping of a plastic piece of food. You don't get to do this in France, at least not so much, and it's associated with genes and other very exciting things. And for a while that works, but the problem is the United States is not going to be able to sell stuff to Europe, because if the value of the euro goes down, just think of it this way, before, for every euro a person in Europe spent, they'd get $1.40 worth of American stuff. Now, for every euro they have to spend, they get $1 of American stuff. That is, they can buy much less from the United States. Our exports are already falling, will continue to fall, and when exports fall from the United States, the people making those exports in an American factory or office lose their jobs. So this is very serious, bad news for the United States. But in the euphoria of American, what shall I call it, jingoism, the notion that the dollar is strong and the euro is weak makes real Americans feel good. This is a mistake. It is not good for the United States economy, not even a little. And very, very dangerous in many, many ways, but not the least of which is the damage it's going to do to the hopes of an American upswing in its economic system. Second thing, these short things that we do at the beginning, a number of you have asked me to talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, which floats in and out of the news. Think of the TPP as the Pacific version of NAFTA. Remember years ago we had that arrangement where the United States, Mexico, and Canada formed themselves into what's called a free trade area. NAFTA, North American Free Trade Area or Agreement or whatever the word is. But it's a deal in which people and goods can move much more easily among the three without having to pay all kinds of duties and fees and so on. And it's supposed to be a good thing for the region. And before it was passed, by the way, it was passed with the enthusiastic support of Bill Clinton, who pushed it through Congress. Bill Clinton, the same president who got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act that prevented banks from taking the risky actions which they then took and which crashed our economy in 2008, et cetera, et cetera. Well, TPP wants to do for about a dozen nations that all border on the Pacific, that's why it's called Trans-Pacific Partnership, wants to do the same thing. Now, for those of you that are not aware of it, before NAFTA, a great debate was held here in the United States in which those who felt it was a wonderful thing and would help the American economy pushed for it, and those who were dubious about that and thought it would hurt the American economy pushed against it, and similar kinds of debate in Mexico and in Canada. What has been the outcome? Well, most of the good things promised haven't happened, and a good number of the bad things threatened have happened. That doesn't mean it'll always work out like that, but it means it sometimes can. Or, this is going to scare some of you, it is the case that in the hoopla of these debates, things can be said which are not true and are said in the heat of struggle to get the bill passed. But even that is apparently too much. So something is going on with the TPP that makes it actually hard to discuss. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time because no one has seen the TPP. The whole business is being kept very hush-hush, documents not released to the press, meetings held at high levels of government officials, and all we are left with is little guesses, little snippets of a release here or there. We know what's going on, but beyond that, we really don't know very much. So all I can offer is an interpretation of how to think about this, because over the months, weeks and months to come, we will learn more, and then we'll talk about it when we have something concrete in front of us. But something can be said beforehand. This is a struggle in one form or another that has gone on for at least 200, 300 years. Here's what it is. Some enterprises, some industries will do much better if there's free trade, if they can sell anywhere, if they can buy inputs cheaply, work them up into a finished product, and sell them around the world. These industries want free trade, because that's a nice sounding way of saying a better deal for my business. It's not complicated. Then there are other businesses who don't want free trade. Why? Because if there's free trade, somebody who produces a cheaper version of the item in another country will dump the stuff here, and then I, the American producer, I'm out of business because everyone's going to buy the Honda and not the Chevy, right? Or the toaster that comes from China rather than the one, I was about to say, that comes from the United States, but unfortunately toasters, like so many things, are no longer produced in the United States because we cannot compete with people who can produce better and cheaper toasters. So there's a fight between all the industries that stand to lose from a deal versus all the industries that stand to win. And the two industries square off because they're big industries with a lot of money on both sides. And so in order to win the law that will get you free trade, in this case passing the TPP, or a law that will, we call that protection, when we don't have free trade, when we block other countries from coming in. The struggle to get the law requires both sides, the group of industries who want free trade on the one hand, the group of industries who want protection on the other. They need to get the endorsement, the support of you, the people, the working people. Because if either side can line you up on their side, then they can go to the House of Representatives and the Senate, and they can get the voting that will get them what they want. So they have to compete for your allegiance. And here's where let's be polite, the stretching of the truth becomes a daily rubber band test. Each side suggests to you that if only you support them, all good things will come to you, and if you support the other side, all bad things will be dumped on you. So don't go this way because you'll lose your job, you'll lose your friends, and your house will fall down. But if you go the other way, the house will double in size, double in value, and all your dreams will come true. This is, to use a technical term, crap. What's going on here is we are being suckered in a debate that has nothing to do with us. The bottom line is, this is about one group of industries who want to make more money versus another. And when you figure out all the consequences, it's no way to tell whether in the end you're going to be a bit better off or a bit. It's not your fight. It's not really relevant. The two sides make up things before you could wade through all the nonsense and get to trying to figure it out. There's so many variables, you couldn't tell. So I understand people are angry for good reason that it's all being done in secret. There's no justification for that. And it makes you suspicious that something is being hidden here, and that may well be. And the suspicion of most people that pay attention is that the big industries not only want the outcome they want, but they don't want to have legal problems of the sort they now have. If you engage in international trade, you got to worry about the laws in the country where you produce stuff. You have to worry about the laws in the countries you traverse to get to your market. You have to worry about the laws in the place where you sell your goods. And this TPP is rumored to have set up, as part of the arrangement, a special set of courts with their own judicial system that will allow corporations who are not happy with how a country is or isn't playing ball to be able to go into a court and get the court to overrule the sovereign laws of that society. That is, there'll be a special court and a special legal system to handle the needs of this corporation. We've never quite had that arrangement before. That represents another step forward in the increasing power of corporations relative to the increasing lack of power that all of us get to enjoy, particularly on the 4th of July. Okay? That was an attempt at humor, what I just did. All right. Trying to keep it light on a subject that doesn't lend itself to that. All right, third item. A person emailed me, and this is happening more and more, and I didn't ask the permission of the person, so I'm not going to mention his or her name, but they brought to my attention a long-standing legal issue, a legal issue. And the legal issue is called, you'll love this, odious debt. Odious. In English, stinky debt. Debt that smells badly. What is this? Well, it turns out back in 1927, a legal issue burst into big debates because of a series of events over the whole previous 100, 200 years. Periodically, it turns out that what we're seeing in Greece today has actually happened in a lot of countries. And what do I mean? Countries decide that a debt accumulated by their country isn't legitimate. And that's what is meant by odious. I'm going to give you some examples. There are many. Mexico, when it became an independent country, came out from under the French and so on, declared that they would not honor the debts that had been incurred in the name of the Mexican people by the colonial administration operated by France. Okay? Here's another example. One of the countries of Central America that has had one of the saddest histories of any country on earth is the country of Haiti. And for a long period of time, Haiti had a very tough dictator named Duvalier. And Duvalier borrowed money like governments do. And when Duvalier finally was booted out, the question was, were the people of Haiti, who had never benefited from the loans that the government took out, were they nonetheless responsible to pay off the debts, even though Duvalier was gone and they repudiated his government, did they have to pay the debts? And that's continuing. That hasn't been resolved. Haiti is still struggling right now to get out from under the debts. Here's another example you may not be aware of. The United States of America. Guess what? During the Civil War, the Confederacy borrowed money. Then the Civil War was over. The Confederacy lost. The Union won. But the Europeans who had lent money to the Confederates, they wanted to be paid. And the United States said, we won't pay. We didn't do that. Those bad, Jefferson Davis and those folks in the South who ran the effort to have their own country, they incurred the debt, they borrowed, they lost. You, the creditor, lose. The United States didn't pay those debts. No, let me do that again. The United States didn't pay the debts. The current Greek government is saying that the debts incurred by previous Greek governments shouldn't have been, weren't legitimate. They are odious debts, and that therefore the current Greek government should not be bound to pay them, nor should it be accused of doing something that is an astonishing betrayal, because it's old news. They're just the latest one down the pike who wants to do it, and typically for the same kinds of reasons, that it's a burden and that people in a society feel it's unreasonable for them to be held accountable for debts incurred by an illegitimate, undemocratic, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted you to be aware that that's another argument in favor of the legitimacy of what the Greeks are proposing to the Europeans, and the claim by the Europeans that this is unthinkable, can't be done, is historically inaccurate and doesn't take into account a fairly well-established legal principle that has been used by other countries, including Germany, including the United States, in the past. Okay, last item before we get to tonight's bigger topics. This is the state of Wisconsin, although what I'm about to say applies to Michigan and some of the other Midwestern states. I think most of you know that in American history, those Midwestern states were, at one time, the center of strong unions in this country, the center of a strong basis of progressive politics, at least by American standards, and so on. And now, with few exceptions, they've gone the other way. They went from Democrat to Republican, but not just Republican, but Republicans with an agenda. And perhaps the most remarkable these days is the Wisconsin governor, Scott Walker, who apparently is also running for president. But then so many other people are, you might have not kept track, but he is one of those who is. And what is he doing? Well, it's sort of interesting, and it's being, as I say, being done in other states there. He's attacking labor union activity. He's even attacking what labor unions have the legal right to do, particularly public employee unions. Been quite a fight in Wisconsin now for a couple years. And he just signed this last week a new bill that basically deprives unions of many of the rights and protections that they have had in this situation for decades. Okay, so that's a pretty heavy assault. Over the last couple of weeks, he also became famous, besides giving speeches at conservative conferences in order to become the Republican candidate for president. He proposed to cut the budget of the University of Wisconsin by $300 million. I won't go, I don't have the time, but that's an enormous cut on any state university. That's a lot of money. If you know what the budgets of a big state university are, that's huge. And when he announced this proposal to cut $300 million from the budget, he said that this was because he wanted the university to become more focused on preparing young people for jobs, and that's the proper function of the university. He made a mistake. The backlash in the state of Wisconsin was overwhelming, and within days of having made the proposal, he withdrew the proposal and claimed that he had been badly misunderstood in the press, although what there was to misunderstand wasn't clear, but you know, it's the best he could do to save face in a situation where he had to back down. What is going on here? If I had time, I would talk to you about what a public university is, what a public university was set up to do, and maybe just a moment, it's worth it, because having been a professor all my life, I'm obviously not neutral about all of this. I believe in public education, and I particularly believe in public higher education. But if you're a reasonably educated human being, and even if you're not, you probably have had the thought, and if you have, I want to encourage it, that the point of education is to develop yourself as a human being, your sensitivity, your ability to reason, your capacity to understand the world around you and to explain it to the people that are close to you and your children, and on and on and on. It's not just to prepare you to get a good job over there in that store or in that office. That's part of what education does, but the idea of reducing it to that means reducing education to vocational training, and those are not the same thing. But in the mind of this governor, they are the same thing. And he doesn't understand or see the reason or the need for doing more than that, especially when you can save a lot of money if you don't bother with that. Teach people what they need to get the jobs. What jobs? Well, if you're following American economics these days, the growing sectors are Walmart, Burger King, Target, you know, jobs where clearly a massive amount of higher education is crucial. Otherwise, you know, you couldn't stack the shelf or answer the phone or whatever it is. Or what are those people in Walmart? The greeters, the ones that say something to you they obviously don't mean as you enter the store, and have to be trained in how to do that effectively. So what is going on here? Two things that are clear. One, Republicans know that the last organized basis for helping the Democratic Party is the trade union movement. Even though it's small now, even though it's weak, it remains an organization that collects money from its members and uses the money to support political friends of labor, and that those are overwhelmingly Democratic Party. You all know that. That's American life. That's the way our system has evolved. To attack the Democrats is to attack an organizational and financial basis of the other party. It's really as simple as that. So Republican governors, if they think they can get away with it, try to undermine, weaken, impoverish labor unions, not out of any great theory of what labor unions are. A lot of these political leaders don't know or care, but because that's a support for the enemy. And I'll come back to that in a minute. The second reason is that the corporations and the wealthy in the United States are in a new situation, and much of what I'm going to say to you this evening is about this. They're in a new situation, and that new situation for them means they're focused elsewhere, out of the United States. And they don't want to spend a lot of energy and a lot of time on an economic framework that is less and less interesting to them with each passing month. They sell fewer goods here, they employ fewer people here, their growth prospects are poorer here than they are in other parts of the world. They want to be busy where the growth is, where they can outcompete their competitors. And this isn't the place. So they don't want to pay a lot of taxes here. Why would they? Why are they going to spend a lot of money to educate large numbers of people? Their growing employment is in India. It's in China, it's in Brazil, that's where they'll be paying taxes there because they're more and more active there. And they'll accept that because the taxes will help develop the schools, which will train the people they will be hiring. The United States is going to spend money training people they're not having any jobs for anyway. That's why the growing jobs are in Walmart and Target. I know I make a mistake. It's not Target. I've been reproached for that. It's Target. See, that's because they need to be, otherwise it would not be sexier than Walmart, which sounds plebeian, you know, so low. Target. It's like you can't have ice cream, you have to have French ice cream. Something no French person would ever recognize as having anything to do with their culture, any more than French cleaning or any other things that are French here. They have nothing to do with it. Okay. So the trick is you've got to lower the government's burden. We don't want to pay taxes. We're the business. We're the rich people. We don't want, what for? What for? It's not for us. We don't get anything out of it. We don't need this university. We're the rich. We don't go to the University of Wisconsin anyway. We go to private schools. And we go to private schools because we want our sons and daughters to meet and marry other people just like us. If we wanted to go to those places, we would do it, but we don't want to. And we sure don't want to pay for them since we're not going to send our kids to them anyway. So we don't want that. Well, they could go to the politicians and say, we don't want to pay taxes. Please go out there and explain it to the people. So the politician would have to get up and say, we're terribly sorry, we're not going to have schools for you, and we're not going to have parks for you, and we're cutting everything. And that's because the corporations and the rich have no use for you. This doesn't sound right. This is not a good political story. So you've got to have a good political story to get the job done. So here's the story, and it's the #1 story of American politics now for some years. Here we go. The government, this is very exciting now, the government is living beyond its means. Ooh, bad. The government the government wants to spend more than it has. Everybody knows, since Grandma told us that that's not a smart thing to do. You should live within your means. A good person does that. So the government, you see, doesn't have the means. So we're really sorry about cutting the daycare center or cutting the hospital money or cutting, but you wouldn't want us to live beyond our means. It all sounds reasonable. And then you add a little thing. You know, if we keep living beyond our means, it's going to catch up with us, and then we're going to have to raise all your taxes to pay for having lived beyond our means. And you wouldn't want that either. So between your moral commitment to living within your means and your desire to avoid taxes, you should vote for the Republicans who make sure that we don't live across our, beyond our means and we don't tax. That's how people like Mr. Walker get elected. That's how they get elected. That this story hangs together. People are terrified. They can't make ends meet as it is. They don't want to pay more taxes, heaven knows. And living beyond their means is what they're struggling with in their own personal lives, as everybody is. So it's a wonderful story to tell. But here's the thing I want to stress with you. It's nonsense. And so it's important not to be fooled by it. When did governments, both state and local and the federal, when did they start living beyond their means, this wonderful phrase? It all begins in 2008. Before that, we didn't have much discussion of this. You know why? Because we weren't doing it. Well, what is it that suddenly made the governments live beyond their means? Two things. Number one, an economic crisis. 2008. Millions of people laid off their jobs. Millions of other people scared to death that they would be laid off, so everybody hunkers down, spends less money, saves more. All of that means much less money coming into the coffers of the government. Unemployed people don't pay an income tax because they don't have an income. People who are afraid of unemployment buy less. That's less sales taxes. You buy fewer shirts, you buy fewer boxes of cookies, etc., etc. So the money coming into governments dropped like a stone. At the same time, the money governments had to pay out went up like a rocket. Why? Two reasons. One, the economic crisis. All the people who no longer earn an income now go and get food stamps, now go and get unemployment. The government has to spend more just as it's taking in less. If this sounds like a stupid way of organizing things, good. Now you're understanding. This is nutty. Just when the government has less money, you need more from it. A smart person, not driven by ideology, would decades ago have said, we've got to arrange things a little differently so that when we need more from the government, it can do it. It's not smart that when you need more from the government, just when it can't do it. But there was a second reason that the money spent by governments took off like a rocket in 2008, and that was to bail out the big corporations and the banks. So now let's see. The government's financial situation got lousy in 2008 because less money was coming in because of the crisis, and more money was going out because of the crisis. The problem in America is that we have an economic system that plunges us into a crisis. The problem is not that the government is living beyond its means. That's too stupid for words. The government isn't living beyond its means. The government has been deprived of the means that are there. Because, just because working people lose their jobs doesn't mean that the government doesn't have means. If the people without jobs don't pay taxes, one of the ways you could handle that, it's a really good idea, is to go to the people who have a lot of money and say, you got to make up for the money that's not coming from the unemployed. And that might make a certain sense, since the people who got unemployed didn't get unemployed because of anything they did. They got unemployed because of what the, corporations and the rich did. So it might be reasonable to tax those who brought us this mess in order to help us get out of the mess they brought. But this did not occur to our political leaders. They weren't prepared to tax rich people and the corporations. Oh no. Oh no. Meanwhile, they had to shell out to bail them out. Not only didn't we tax them, we bailed them out. And then we announced to the people, the government is living beyond its means. It's spending more than it's taking in. I mean, that's true. But that misses the little detail of how we got into this mess, which might give us a hint of how we ought to get out of it. That's what has to be prevented. We have to limit the conversation to a government living beyond its means, say that that's very bad behavior, shouldn't do that, and that the solution is to cut spending on a university, on a daycare center, on a hospital, and the Governor Walker of Wisconsin is a cheerleader and a leader in making these cuts. Along the way, by cutting government employment, he decimates those unions. Those are the people who support his Democratic opponents. He's killing two birds with one lovely stone, and we're all sitting there having discussions about whether governments should live beyond their means, which is a silly mistake about what went on here. And if people understood it better, they would not find what people like Snyder is doing and Scott Walker and the others in the Midwest. Last short thing. This will scare you a little, but it has to. Over the last week, and the absence of publicity about this, I expect a lot in the way of shenanigans, but this one blew me away. Over the last week, a bank in Austria collapsed. So I'm seeing your faces. You weren't aware of this. Okay, well, let me tell you about it. The Hypo Alpe Adria Bank. Turns out that a closer inspection than earlier of its books indicated that it was short compared to what it had said earlier by the sum of 10 billion euros. So this just gives the concept short a whole new boost in the sense of what we mean. It fell short. And the government said they've fallen short and they don't have anything with which to pay it. They have no money. You always know you're in a troubled area if the bank turns to you and says it has no money. At that point, you need to gather your things together and run. And it's not even clear where you should run. Just get away from that bank as fast as possible. The bank collapsed. The government of Austria stepped in, as governments do these days, and bailed out the bank, but with this proviso. We will make good, we will guarantee 1 billion of this bank's shortfall. Now, people of Austria are very smart. They subtracted 1 billion, what the government's going to give, from what the bank owes to its creditors, 10 billion, and they clearly understood there was a lot left. Then they went and they read the documents. And it turned out that very good politicians had been in the pocket of this bank, and that one of the states of Austria is divided into 8 or 9 states, is called Carinthia. Carinthia, it's the part of Austria on the Italian border. The state of Carinthia made a big mistake. It guaranteed the other $9 billion. Interesting move, since the annual revenue of the state is $2 billion. See, it's not smart. If you earn $2 billion a year, don't go guaranteeing loans for $9 billion. Not smart. The day will come, and in the case of Austria, it came this last week, when you will be on the hook, and the president of Carinthia announced he can't and he won't pay, since he would have to literally snatch huge amounts of money out of the pockets of every Austrian who lives in Carinthia to pay this debt off, and he was clearly aware that this would not be good for his political future. They would not only not vote for him, they would do things to him that I can't even describe in a polite room of this sort. Now it also turns out that among the creditors that Carinthia is not going to make good are several large banks in Germany who are now going to be in greater difficulty than anyone knew because, what's the problem? The problem here is huge amounts of homeowner loans that this bank made to Austrians, to Czechs, to Slovenians, and others in Central and Eastern Europe, and those people are in trouble and can't pay back the mortgages, which means that they can't pay back the bank, which therefore has no money to pay back the people it borrowed from to get the money it lent to the homeowners. Now, I could spend a lot of time going through this. I don't want to. I want one lesson to come out of this for all of you. The next time someone tells you that the capitalist economic system is a spectacularly efficient, powerful, effective, well-organized machine, you should put on your face the kind of sneer you reserve for the worst person in the world. We are now in the next phase of this. No one knows where that's one of the reasons you didn't hear about this. There's a news report. Detail, if you hunt down, you get the news about it. But it's like in the early days under Bush of the subprime mortgage crisis when President Bush assured us nothing to worry about, won't last very long, will not affect the rest of him, blah, 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 blah. He's well informed. We made fun of President Bush. It's a popular sport. We particularly enjoyed it in the case of George Bush, but it wouldn't have made any difference who that was. It has nothing to do with all of this. His job is to say whatever seems reasonable to say when he's in front of a camera. Meanwhile, the underlying economic reality is opaque for most Americans. Anyway, we are not out of the crisis. That's what it means if a major lender in the middle of Europe, not in Greece, not in Spain, not in Italy, in Austria, is in deep trouble. Deep trouble so that it has to declare it can't function, that the national government is embarrassed because it can't back it, that it tells the rest of the world this little state will do it. The state says, not what, we're not doing it. I mean, this is childish nonsense. This is a system spinning out of control. And that should worry you because you live in it. Okay. Let me turn, there is one more thing. This is a report from the Economic Policy Institute. Every now and then I use their work, epi.org. It is one of the best gatherers of economic analysis and statistics that you can find. The stuff is free on the internet, no problem to get it. I really found this piece of work of theirs very interesting. It measures the change in hourly wages, what are called real wages, adjusted for the prices people have to pay, between 2008 and the present, so the crisis from the time it begins to today. And it compared what happened to real wages among the following 5 groups. People with less than a high school education, what happened to them? People who had a high school diploma, people with some college, people who graduated college, and people with an advanced degree beyond a bachelor's degree, okay? So the best one was the advanced degree. What is their accumulated change in real hourly wages from 2007 to 2014? 0. That's the best. People with degrees, on average in America, they got the following. Exactly the same wage in 2014 that they had gotten in 2007. They went nowhere. The productivity of these people kept going up year after year, but their wage went nowhere. That's the best. Second best were people with a college degree. Their real wage dropped 2% across those 7 years. Next, and this may surprise you, people with a high school degree, they dropped 3.7%. Next, people with less than high school, they dropped 5.2%. But here's the one that I found interesting. People who had finished high school, gone into college, but not finished college. So they had some college, They did the worst of all, minus 5.9%. What's the message here? Everybody in the American labor force was shafted. Those with an education, those without it, and not even in the pattern you might expect. It does suggest that if you go sit in a university a long time, not just 4 years of college, but as many years thereafter as possible, and if you incur a great deal of debt in order to be able to do that, you can expect absolutely no change in your income for 8 years at a shot. Another reason to be a supporter of an economic system with a delivery of that kind of stunning performance. Okay. All right. Let me turn now to the topics that we promised to deal with today. First, the global economic inequality causes and consequences. In the interest of time, I'm not going to give you 27 examples. I do that now almost every time we get together. It's not really necessary. 90% of the wealth in this country is owned by the top 10% of the people, and the other 10% of the wealth is fought over by the other 90% of the people. You don't really need to know much more than that. You live in an extremely unequal society. The only thing that makes that less obvious to you is that an unspeakable amount of effort is devoted to obscuring that reality to you every day. On the television, in the newspaper, in the school, everything is done to keep you from a simple number which all government statistics validate. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth, and the other 10% of the wealth is fought over by the other 90% of the people. That is called extreme inequality. How has that changed over the last 30 or 40 years? That's what I want to focus your attention on. And it's a little complicated, but it's worth going through. First, capitalism, as I have told you now several times, but it seems something that it's interesting that you resist, as do many of my audiences. It's too much, maybe, and I mean that seriously. Capitalism for the last 40 years has made a decision. Capitalists have made a decision. And that decision is to do what they've always done, which is to seek the most profitable situation to produce whatever they make, to be profitable, to grow. And in the 1970s, they kind of reached a decision. Not all of them at the same time. Some did it sooner. And when they made a lot of money, all the others who were slower play catch up, do it too. What did they do? They basically decided that the jet engine allows you to go to any corner of the planet in a few hours. And modern computers and telecommunications means that you can observe, you can monitor, you can test, you can control, you can supervise production in a factory, an office, or a store as easily 10,000 miles away as you can do it across the street. In the first 200 years of capitalism in America and Europe and Japan, the production was concentrated in the places where it began, in the basic cities, in Tokyo, in London, in New York, in Chicago. That's where we built the factories, that's where we built the storage facilities, the stores, the offices. They were all there in these monstrous cities like the one we're in now, that became famous because of the incredible concentration of everything here. Along the way, the workers, watching this enormous wealth explode, demanded at least a small piece of it. And so wages went up. Standard of living went up. Not in the rest of the world. The rest of the world was the hinterland. That's where the food comes from. That's where the raw materials come from. That's where the immigrants come from, looking for the jobs where they are in the big industrial centers. That's the hinterland. The conditions there deteriorated. Standard of living fell. The opposite of what was going on in the center, Western Europe, North America, Japan. Starting in the 1970s, capitalists simply recognized what they themselves had achieved. Big, powerful capitalist enterprises, but located where the wages were high, when they didn't need to be located there anymore, when the jet engine and telecommunications meant that they didn't need to produce goods in Cincinnati or Chicago or Louisville or Oakland. They would produce them in Shanghai and Mumbai and fill in the blank. Why? Because the wages there are a small fraction of what they are here. Because those societies are poor and desperate for jobs and will offer one inducement after another so that a company will move there. Which is why you're all wearing clothes made over there and toasting your bread in the morning with a toaster over there and watching a TV made over there. You know the story. You know it. You're living it. So what happened is capitalists moved. And they moved to make a lot more profits, which they have done. This was a good strategy for them. So people who are shareholders, little footnote, 1% of shareholders own 75% of shares. That's even more concentrated than the wealth in general. Okay, so the wealth from moving to low-wage places accrued to the top in America. All the people who got cashed in on that profitable relocation of capital became wildly wealthy. That's what we've watched in this country for the last 25 years. The billionaires and the millionaires and the spectacular packages for the CEOs and all the rest of it. Meanwhile, the average American was watching the good jobs disappear because they left. That's why Detroit is a basket case as an economic unit, because all those car jobs, which once were the best jobs you could get, are now gone. They're in China, they're in India, they're in Canada, they're in Mexico, and so on. So in the United States, the inequality became larger. Why? Because capitalists did what capitalists do. The same capitalism that in the first 200 years made America a place where your wages were higher than the rest of the world, that same capitalism has basically, and my apologies to Arnold Schwarzenegger, has basically said to us, hasta la vista, baby. I'm leaving. You're staying here. I'm out. And you're not going to have good jobs. You're going to be working at Walmart and at Target and at Burger King and at Pizza Hut. And I could go on and on. It's what you see when you walk down the street. That's what, and you're not going to get a good salary there, and you're not going to have good benefits, and your job isn't going to be secure. You're going into a new phase of capitalism. The one on the up that took you up lasted about 200 years. The one that's taken you down, a dot, dot, dot. Nobody dares to discuss that with you because it's too depressing what's in store. So the gap between rich and poor becomes gross in this country. 10% of the people have 90% of the, all that. Now let's look at China, India, and Brazil. The same thing, but for a different reason. As capital moves, as American capitalists relocate to those countries, they have to make deals with local lawyers and local stockbrokers and local specialists of various kinds. They don't want to cause a backlash, so they cut the local capitalists into their operations as they come. And so they produce millionaires and billionaires there too. But that's in a society where the mass of people are very poor still. So in the country producing the most millionaires right now, the People's Republic of China. This is a very poor country, but it's producing billionaires. So the gap between rich and poor is an enormous problem in China right now, which the leading politicians there say more often to their people than our politicians say it to our people. But now the most interesting thing, in the middle, there's something changing. The mass of the American working class and the mass of the European working class and the mass of the Japanese working class is sinking, is lowering its standard of living. But the Chinese working class's wages are going up. And the same is true in India, and the same is true even in Brazil and other places like that. The middle, or to put it differently, a well-paid working class is disappearing here and emerging over there. They're having the upswing that we had 6 decades ago. And we're having the downswing that was their history for the previous 200 years. It's role reversal, and the world has not come to cope with that. Much of what you read about ISIS and about Muslims and about terrorism, it's the adjustment of a world to this kind of mammoth shift in a short amount of time for which nobody was prepared. That's much more what's going on than some religious dispute between this doctrine and that doctrine. Most of the people involved couldn't tell you what those doctrines were anyway. Well, what does this portend? 3 things. 1, depressed world economy. Why? Because the standard of living of the American, the North American, the Western European, and the Japanese that is going down was at a much higher level than the rising standard of living of the workers in the third world. So the net result is the middle class is shifting, but the new ones have less money to spend than the old ones no longer can spend. So the bottom line is less spending. So for example, I don't know how many of you follow these things, but the overcapacity for producing automobiles in the world is huge. We have the factories to produce way more cars than we can sell, meaning that there's an enormous struggle going on because these car companies, and there aren't that many of them, right? You all know it. A dozen and you're done. They all know that a good number of them won't be here in 10 years. And the question is, who survives? Because there's too much capacity. Or to say the same thing another way, we've rearranged the income so that more and more is at the top, and less is in the middle and the bottom, and the middle and the bottom is who buys most of the stuff. So that's a very bad future for the world economy. There's not enough purchasing power all over, and we're moving from upper paid, better paid people to less paid people. Even though the less paid ones are enjoying an upturn, it's not enough to offset the down effect of the downturn of Americans, Western Europeans, and Japan. Number 2, because money is concentrated in the hands of the rich, the net effect around the world is to cut drastically on tax payments. Now, you all get bits and pieces of that, but that's a global phenomenon, and there's nothing mysterious about it. The richer you are, the more you can afford to buy the specialized skills of lawyers and tax accountants whose job it is to get you out of your taxes. That is legal in many parts of the world, like it is in the United States, and where it isn't legal, there are other ways to do it. Those of you who pay attention will have noticed a very interesting thing. Credit Suisse, one of the biggest banks in the world, dumped their leader and replaced him, very unusual in big banks, with a black man who's now the head of one of the biggest banks in the world. Forget his name. Anyone here can help me? It was in today's paper. What? No, anyway, it was interesting just because you don't see a black face usually in that situation. So he's the new leader. Well, this bank is in deep trouble. That's one of the reasons they got rid of this leader and they got this new guy in, and I hope he's not being set up for the fall here. But they got in trouble because they were accused of helping, particularly Americans, get out of their tax bills. But if you move wealth from the average person into the rich, your tax take for the government drops like a stone because the rich have ways of getting out of their taxes that you all don't. And even if you have them, you don't know it, and you can't afford the people who do know it who will do it for you. This may come as a shock to you, but it shouldn't. Okay? Third, when you have a growing inequality, the way this global capitalism is now working, you have another step. You are giving more and more money to a smaller part of the population, and in the process you are teaching them how vulnerable this makes them. What makes them vulnerable? people like me telling people like you that 90% of the wealth is held by 10% of the people, and you're scrabbling with your neighbor over the crumbs that remain. I am making life harder for people at the top by telling that story, and so is everybody else who's telling that story. And the people at the top aren't stupid. They understand that the very success they have at gathering more and more wealth into their hands carries with it its dialectical opposite, vulnerability to envy, to jealousy, to bitterness, and all that goes with it. I'm sure no one in this room would ever entertain a thought or a feeling like that, but you know, other people might. Other people might. And rich people are worried about those other people. So they need to take a portion of their money, it's simply prudent, and buy and control the political system. Why? Because if 10% own everything and the other 90% are basically scrabbling around with too much student debt, too much on their credit card, too much tension in the family over the money they don't have, sooner or later this is going to blow up. And then those people are going to realize, hey, we're the majority, the 90% who don't have. And the 10% who have it all are the minority. And the last time I looked, the majority have more votes than the minority, because that's what the words mean. And so we could use our political majority to get the laws that will redivide the wealth. What's the worst sentence you can utter in the United States Congress? Redistribute wealth. Ah! People run. They know what's going on. So the rich have to control the political system so it can't do what it was set up to do. So when you discover a gap or a clash between democracy and what we have, welcome, you've now figured it out. We can't afford, in a society with this kind of inequality, even the trappings of democracy. It all has to be taken care of. And we can cut universities, but we keep building the prisons, right? We got to control. We've got to control because it is an explosion that's building in this society. Will they be able to prevent it? Who knows? History suggests not forever. And the question is really then, how long? Next, reform versus revolution. Okay. The last time capitalism collapsed, the 1930s, in the United States, and in Western Europe, and in Japan for that. I mean, all these countries had terrible problems. A cry went up, the way it is beginning to be in this country. That's why I told you the story of my trip to California, the kind of questioning, the kind of excitement. I don't know if, did I mention to you, all 2000, that was paid. People paid to come and listen to me talk. Now, let me tell you something. When Americans pay $25 to listen to someone like me say the kinds of things I say, things are changing. Whoa, there's no music. All my clothes stay on. I mean, the people are not coming to look at me. They're coming to hear what it is I have to say. And they're parting with money. A lot of it. That's why they are fundraisers for those radio stations, because they earn a lot of money. When capitalism collapsed in the 1930s, two interesting things happened. Country after country veered off into the left or veered off into the right. The mass of people became disgusted and disillusioned with the conventional middle-of-the-road politics that they had had in the previous decades, just like we are now becoming slowly, or not so slowly, disgusted. Remember I told you about Greece last time, where the two major parties that have been in power for the last 40 years now can't get a third of the vote between them. The middle is the exact same thing is happening in Spain, and it's happening in Italy, and so on. And even here, that's what the Tea Party over there and Occupy Wall Street over there, it's kind of what they're doing, what they've been doing. So in that moment in the 1930s, when the crisis was worse than what we have now, a debate began. And that debate is unfolding in this country too, and because I want you to see it, I'm going to tell you what happened in the 30s, because then it'll help you see it around you when you encounter it now. The debate has many different names, but one of them is reform versus revolution. What does that mean? A large number of people said something has to be done to reform capitalism, because look at the millions of people without work, look at the millions of people that are suffering. I mean, it's a no-brainer. You got to fix this system is broken. And then there were other people who said, no, this system is beyond broken. This system is no good and has to be replaced with another one. It's a little bit like that famous refrigerator example. You know, the refrigerator breaks, you call the refrigerator guy. He comes, puddles around, and you have the refrigerator. That happens 10 times. Then you call him the 11th time, and he takes you aside and says, look, I know you're not going to want to hear what I have to tell you. And if you want me, I'll fix the damn compressor. It'll be $284, but you're wasting your money because it's going to conk out on you, you know, next week, next month. And then you'll be sorry you paid you got to buy a new refrigerator. Terrible moment. You hope it never happens to you. You know it will. Right? Here's another example. Civil War in the United States. Large numbers of people came to the realization that slavery was awful. Then there were the reformists and the revolutionaries. And what was the difference? The reformers said, you know, the slave isn't fed properly, the slave doesn't have adequate clothing, the slave doesn't have proper housing, the integrity of the slave family is not respected, blah, blah. And these things, they should be better fed, they should be better clothed, they should be better. Those were the reforms. They wanted to make changes. The revolutionaries came across and said to the reformers, are you crazy? The problem isn't that the slave isn't eating enough. The problem is that it's a slave. And the way you solve the problem is you stop allowing slavery. End of conversation. You don't fix it. You don't reform it. You overcome it. You go beyond it. You have a different system. Or in that, which would mean in that case, you liberate, you enfranchise the slaves. You stop you make slavery, like in the 14th Amendment, it's illegal. You can't do it. Okay? So the reformers wanted to fix American capitalism. The revolutionaries said, get rid of it. Substitute socialism, communism, whatever form of that they had to say. And then it was a real fight for a while. And Roosevelt, who was the representative of the business interest of the country, as every president we've had has been more or less, was very smart. He knew that those people had millions of folks on their side, those reformers and those revolutionaries. And he knew that to keep the system going, he had to come to some kind of deal with these people. He knew what he preferred, reform, because he didn't want the system to be given up. Giving up the system would have meant a fundamental reorganization. They didn't do that. The struggle between reformers and revolutionaries was won by the reformers. Partly out of their own struggle. They thought revolution couldn't work, that revolution would make things even worse, that revolution would be scary and dangerous and violent. They had all their concerns. But there was also Roosevelt saying, I'll make a deal with you reformers. With you revolutionaries, I got nothing to talk to you about. So a deal was made. Everybody went along with that deal. I'm not going to say that again. Everybody. Not every person. There were dissent people who didn't want to, good revolutionaries. But even the socialist and communist parties, it was too powerful in the air. Roosevelt said, I'm going to take care of the mass of people just like you asked me to. And they had a real reform. Remember, I've done this with you. The Social Security system in the middle of a Great Depression. We never had that before. An unemployment compensation system in the middle of a depression. We never had that before. A minimum wage, the first time we declared that in the United States. And a federal government employment program that gave 15 million people jobs. Amazing. Amazing what was done. And proof positive, for those of you who don't know American history, that the notion that you could have a depression and instead of bailing out the folks at the top so it trickles down, you bail out the folks at the bottom and let it trickle up, that's a viable policy. That's what we did in the United States, and we went to the left. And the politician who took us to the left, because that was the way he sort of get out of it, became the most popular president in the history of the United States. He was reelected 4 times. No president had ever had that before. So a politician who says, I can't do that because I'll be hounded out of office, on the contrary. You will be kept in office even if you don't want to stay there. Roosevelt died as president because he literally, not that he wanted to leave, but he couldn't have if he'd wanted to. He couldn't have. Well, why do I tell you this? Because it's important to understand what it means that the reformers won and revolutionaries didn't. What the revolutionaries never got was a fundamental change in the capitalist arrangement of doing things. So the same tiny number of people kept owning the factories, the offices, and the stores. And the mass of people kept earning their bread by selling their capacity to work to those who owned, going 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and all of the rest. And slowly, in the decades since 1945, America discovered what all people discover if they limit themselves to reforms. If you win a reform, but you leave in place the people from whom you won it, they can take back what they gave you. And the last 30 years has been precisely that. They have taken it back. We have no public employment program. We just went through the second worst collapse of capitalism in American history. At no point did either Bush or Obama even discuss a federal jobs program. That's a retreat from what we did last time. We have denied unemployment compensation at the end of a 2-year period to now millions of Americans who no longer qualify, who've lost that benefit. We're actively discussing reducing Social Security. I mean, how many examples do you want? It's taken away. So the real question is, what this time are the people going to do? Are we all going to mobilize, struggle, build new organizations, revitalize old organizations in order to get another set of reforms? Another set of laws? A boost in the social? Whatever we get, if we don't change the fundamental system, can and will be taken away. The concession will be temporary. Because that's all it has to be. Get us through the rough times, and then we'll take back from the mass of people whatever it is they squeezed out of us in a moment of our weakness in an economic downturn. Last point. What then would a revolutionary change now be? What might we call a socialism for the 21st century that learns from what has happened in the last 2 centuries of capitalism, including the mistakes made by reformers and revolutionaries? If you don't learn from your mistakes, right, you repeat them. So here's what we would have to do. You would have to make sure that any reform won now, a public employment program, a boosting of Social Security. By the way, just a footnote. You know how you solve the unemployment problem in the United States? You lower the age of retirement. You don't raise it, you lower it. You allow people to retire when they are 60, not 65. Why? Because millions of older Americans will then take advantage, retire, opening up the world of work for all the young people who need it. That's what you do. A society that raises, keeps old people in longer than they would have stayed, thereby blocking the young from the jobs they need. This is nuts, but it passes for common sense in a society that's nuts. And you have to sometimes, we all have that in our lives. We do something, and then a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband or a wife suddenly kind of shakes us one day, and we realize we've been crazy. And you need a good friend or somebody who can snap you out of it. So I'm trying to perform that function on a mass basis here. So what would a revolutionary alternative be now? You'd have to guarantee in some way that whatever reforms we produce and win now can't be taken away. And how do you do that? You cannot leave in power the people who now own and operate the factories, the stores, and the offices. Why? Because if you own an enterprise, all the profits made by all the people that are working come into your hands. That's what it means to be on the board of directors. That's what it means to be a major shareholder. The wealth that a lot of people produce flows into a funnel, and you get it. And if you're not stupid, you're going to use that money to keep yourself in that very nice situation. Keep those people working, and you on the receiving end of and you'll buy the politicians you need to keep that going, and everything else. And you'll do whatever you need, including moving production to a low-wage area. You'll do all that. And you don't want to pay taxes, so you'll take money from the government, which will mean that the Social Security gets cut and all the rest. So the way you guarantee that a reform isn't taken away is that you stop allowing a small group of people to be in the position of gathering into their hands the profits that the mass of people make, because they will use it, as they always have, to keep themselves in that position. So how do you do it? You change the organization of work. You make the people who work in a store, an office, or a factory become themselves the owners and the operators. You democratize the enterprise. You make the enterprise work the way a local community does. You vote. All the workers, one person, one vote, decide what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits. If the workers themselves own and operate, they're not going to take away from themselves, because that's nuts. I take away from my right hand, and look, now my left hand has it, and you point out to the people that the two hands are on you. You haven't done anything. You've moved it from one to... So if the people own and operate the enterprises, they've got no point to squeeze themselves as workers for the benefit of themselves as owners. Makes exactly as much sense as to squeeze the owners to help the workers, because they're the same people. This isn't complicated. You have to bring the collective democracy principle into the workplace, which, I know some of you have heard me say this, but I'll say it again, is where it should have been all along. If you're in a democratic society, and if you talk like that, then the first place you institute democracy is the place where most adults spend most of their lives, at work. What good is it to have it in the community for our political running of our town if we don't do it at work? Work is what we do all our life. Work is what we train, what we develop ourselves for. Work is what we prepare for in the morning before we're there. It's what we recuperate from in the afternoon when we come home. It's our lives. If you believe in democracy, it should have been done there long ago. Instead, we all think it's normal to go to work, step across the threshold, and there another person whom we don't choose, do not elect, do not control, tells us what to do, how to do it, with what machine, with what result, and at the end of the day, you get the hell out of there. We keep what you produce. That's not democratic, not even close. And the irony is, the revolution, the socialism for the 21st century, will therefore have to, sooner or later, get to the understanding the issue isn't having the government take over. That could substitute a bunch of officials for the board of directors you have now. What's that? You're still not in control. Or to have planning substitute for markets. Whatever the virtues of that are, you haven't changed how that enterprise operates every day. What is the position of the working people in it? Are they just the drones who come and work, or are they the people who own it, who operate it, who design it, and who have the final say over whether anything won by themselves as workers is lost by themselves? They're not going to take it away from themselves any more than a child takes away from itself the truck or the dolly that it has acquired. That's not what people do. And we wouldn't live in an unequal society either, would we? Because if the workers together decided what to do with the profits, would they give billions to 3 people while everybody else can't send their kid to college? Unlikely. Would they give some workers more and less? Sure. But not 1,000 to 1, not 500, none of that. This is not complicated. If we want less inequality, if we want not to be without the basics of a decent economic life, we have to recognize we gave reform its chance. They won in the 1930s, and we've had the 50 years of seeing what they achieved. And they've lost most of what they got. We have to learn from that the next time, which I think is here, we're in it, we can't make that mistake again. First time, shame on them for taking it away. If we do the same thing again, shame on us, because we will have not learned the lesson. Reform didn't do the job. And if it's too scary for you to use the word revolution, fine, don't use it. Call it brown cottage cheese. Whatever you call it, you understand the point. You cannot slogan, if I were to be a writer of slogans, if you want the people, if you want the economic system to serve the people, you've got to put the people in charge. If you leave in charge a tiny minority, you can't really be surprised if the economic system works for them. Come on. Most of you are honest enough to know that if you were on the board of directors of General Motors, your car would be spiffier than the one you now have. You too would get caught up in the logic of that system. You live in a city where you are next door to more billionaires than any other city on this planet. Whether you recognize it or not, they're all around you. And their restaurants and their high-rise apartments and their fancy, it's right, you all know where it is. You all know which neighborhoods you can walk around in comfortably at all times and which neighborhoods you can't. Because we all kind of know. The only thing is to face, this is a system that is vulnerable. It's not delivering the goods. It stopped doing it decades ago. It papered that over with an explosion of credit so that you could keep on buying stuff you knew in your soul you couldn't afford. But that plastic card was so exciting, and you did it. And you even now feel funny when you go into the neighborhood bodega to get a bottle of water and you hand them your little plastic card. Another debt at the end of the month is going to come and bite you. We know it's a system that doesn't work except for the top. And the only question, politically, economically, ideologically, is how long all of you, us, you, me, will tolerate this. The day the people in these societies say, we're not having this, it's over. There are not enough cops, there are not enough military, there's not enough. There's too much of us and too few of them. And more people are figuring it out. I understand that the spaces for us in those camps around the United States are also growing. But that's the logic of this situation. What would you expect the other side to be blind to this? They got a better grip on this than most of us on this side do. But more and more of us are running around, saying, hey, look at what you all know. Just draw the conclusions. Thank you very much for coming. I will see you in April.